You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 16th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, after the US offers a hand to Europe this weekend, what did Marco Rubio's speech to the Munich Security Conference do to calm transatlantic relations? We'll examine this weekend's events and...
If we need to enhance our presence, let's talk to the Greenlanders. Let's talk about how we can enhance and build on our shared Arctic security interests.
We will have an interview with the US Senator for Alaska, who will explain why Donald Trump is still determined to have Greenland. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, can the US precipitate regime change in Cuba? We'll ask what Italy wants from Africa as a summit is held in Addis Ababa, and...
Transport in terms of impact will never be greater than if you have to build everywhere. So we're trying to minimize the impact by using collective means rather than individuals.
Christophe Duby, the Executive Director of the Olympic Games. He'll be speaking to Monocle Radio a little later as week 2 of our Olympics coverage from Milan begins. Plus, we'll go through the papers too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. The man accused of carrying out the Bondi Beach shooting has appeared in a video link at a Sydney magistrates' court for the first time. Israel's Prime Minister has demanded the removal of all enriched uranium from Iran as part of any deal on Tehran's nuclear program. And the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has presided over the completion ceremony of a newly built set of apartments for bereaved families of soldiers killed in military operations in Russia. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, as the Munich Security Conference drew to a close yesterday, the transatlantic relationship was more in the spotlight than ever. Were we looking at deep divisions between Europe and the US, as warned by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, or should we take heart from the words of the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who stressed that Washington wanted a strong Europe and a revitalised transatlantic relationship? So who won? Well, I'm joined now by Monocle Radio's producer of the Foreign Desk, Anita Riotta, who's been in Munich throughout this weekend, has literally just got back. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Good to have you in the studio, Anita. So your sort of one takeaway from how it felt in Munich this year, because this time last year, everybody was reeling from J.D. Vance. I remember you saying things felt a little bit more settled this time around.
Absolutely. And you're right to bring up the J.D. Vance speech from last year, because that was still very much setting the bar for this meeting. I think the sense amongst delegates was, how much progress have we made from that moment, which really, as listeners know, just completely shifted the paradigm of the last 80 years of the transatlantic relationship. This time, both on the American side and the European side, the sense was, how much diplomatic progress have we made on that front? How much have we increased defense spending? How much is Europe taking seriously the fact that it has to, in a way, rise to the occasion and see that its defense can no longer be solely expected to rely on the United States. And it did seem like progress on those fronts had been made.
It's interesting because these are the questions that the Europeans were asking themselves just before Donald Trump was re-elected. Can they step up at speed and efficiently? And yet they're still trying to sort themselves out. And what was noticeable over the weekend, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, is that we had Friedrich Merz addressing the US contingent in English, saying that the transatlantic relationship was subject to deep divisions. But then we had Marco Rubio coming up and saying, well, let's revitalise it. Do we know who kind of won this argument?
Look, I think the impression I received from the Europeans we spoke to after Secretary Rubio's speech was, you can put it in prettier packaging, but the message is the same. We are happy that he came in with a slightly more dulcet tone about Europe's responsibility and Europe needing to do more to defend itself. But at the same time, the message was the same. The message that the transatlantic relationship, as we've come to know it, will not be the same going forward. That message was there. And as you're saying, the fact that he was trying to tie the two parties together through a shared history is not even still what the Europeans want to hear. The Europeans want to hear that we have security and shared security interests and shared values. And that is what keeps this alliance strong and moving into the future, not some sort of, fairly whitewashed historical ties.
And finding values is something that the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, talked about yesterday. I think it was described by one commentator as snarky, which I thought was quite an interesting adjective. But she was responding to Rubio, and she said that, contrary to what some may say, woke, decadent Europe is not facing civilizational erasure. And she says that some countries still want to join our club, and not just fellow Europeans. She was talking about Canada at this point. The fact that we're talking about woke, decadent Europe and civilizational erasure, it's all pointing to those values that you talk about as well. But it also seems pretty personal.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we absolutely got the sense also from the conversations we had both on and off the record that entry and admittance into the European club, whether that is the EU or sort of just the rapprochement that you are seeing across the continent, that is still very much the name of the game. And we spoke to ministers, defense ministers all along sort of Russia's border, saying that it is really important for them to prioritize accession into the EU and to make sure that their ties with their European allies are stronger than ever. So in a sense, Rubio's comments I do really believe have brought European partners that had maybe taken each other for granted or not really invested in these relationships in the last few years to realize that actually this is what we have and this is who we can rely on. We had the honor of hearing a speech and sitting in the same room as President Zelensky over the weekend. And one of the things that he said that really stuck with me the most was, today only Ukraine is defending Europe.
Wow. So you have now this situation that you have the most embattled country having to sort of rise up to defend European values. But the American voice was still very loud there, wasn't it? And as part of your many interviews, actually, I'll ask you who it is that we've actually got in the bag that we're going to hear in the Foreign Desk in future weeks. But there were some strong American voices on the ground, weren't there?
Absolutely. And look, it's not to pretend that the pull and the weight of Washington, D.C. Is now sort of forgone. Of course, it looms very large over the entire conference. I would say that the American voices there are trying to both acknowledge how different this moment is and how maybe the sort of more veteran delegates would say that this is certainly not the tone America should be striking with its allies. But now there does seem to be a little bit more of, okay, well, we're here. Last year was shock and a bit of devastation, to be honest with you. This year was a bit more of, okay, this is the situation we find ourselves in. These are the representatives that the White House will put forward. I will both voice my disagreement if that is how I feel, but I also need to bring into focus, the issues that I think are important, whether it is the defense of Ukraine, whether it is American democracy. And, what is amazing about, as you're saying, about really being there on the ground is you cannot believe the amount of power that is in the Beresharov Hotel over those 3 days. As a journalist, you're just escorted through so that you, I think, behave and stick to the places and things that you said you would. But the sort of desire to just reach out and grab people and pull them into an interview is so strong. And sometimes you are able to do that. And we were very lucky that we were able to speak with sitting U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska to to tell us a bit about why she was there, how she has lived, the Arctic being thrust on the international stage. This is what she had to tell us.
Relationships matter. How we treat our friends matter. The trust that has built up over decades and generations matters. And so when words like occupy or take over or acquire are used, that disrespects a sovereign territory, disrespects the autonomy of the people of Greenland, that's a problem. But I don't think that it is something that cannot be reconciled through honest dialogue, openness about what is being sought. If we're talking about shared security interests in the Arctic space, let's talk about it. We have been doing it with Greenland for decades now. If we need to enhance our presence, let's talk to the Greenlanders. Let's talk to the Kingdom of Denmark about how we can enhance and build on our shared Arctic security interests.
You've been to Greenland recently. I mean, arriving there now as a US Senator and a Republican US Senator, was the welcome at all equivocal?
I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it at all. In fact, I felt that there was an appreciation for the fact that there was a bipartisan delegation from the United States that was there to really share the message of we want to engage in a cooperative dialogue. We want to build on our relationship. We're not seeking to divide. And if anything, to present a little calm to the situation, which has understandably just been wrought with anxiety. The people of Greenland have been very, very anxious, and understandably so.
Which is what I found when I was there myself a couple of weeks before that. And during that period, which I guess was the peak of the is this really happening or not phase, how personally strange was that for you? Because we've spoken before about the United States not taking seriously its own patch of Arctic security, i.e. the state you represent. Were you sitting at home in Juneau thinking, how on earth did we get to this?
We need to recognize that the Arctic has been, I think, underappreciated, not just by the United States, but around the NATO countries. Investment in the Arctic has been limited at best. And so there's a great deal of focus right now on Greenland and what we need to do for security on that eastern side of the continent. But I will maintain that just as important, as vitally important, is ensuring that on the western side, where Alaska sits right smack next to Russia, that we also need to appreciate that investment in infrastructure, investment in everything from the communications to defense to what we need to do from an economic security perspective. We've got work to do in the Arctic. And so when you suggest that the way to address that is to occupy Greenland, that just creates division and dissension rather than a focus on the real issue, which is what are we going to do jointly, cooperatively, to protect this vast area of the globe that is pretty wide open right now.
On that thought, and also I guess on the subject of ambiguous welcomes, what's it been like being a Republican US Senator coming to this event? Are you getting Europeans saying, seriously, how are we expected to do another 3 years of this?
Well, in fairness to the question, I just arrived a few hours ago, and so I haven't been pelted with those types of questions. But I think it's important to recognize that there may be views and positions that are expressed by the administration. We're going to hear from Secretary Rubio tomorrow. That's important for this dialogue, this broader dialogue that's going on. But the Congress is also a separate but equal branch in the United States government. I think it's important that you have members of Congress that are here to express their views, their constituents' views, and also that you hear from Republicans and Democrats. I would like to think that when it comes to Arctic security, it's not a partisan issue. It's not something that divides us by party. And so it's going to be interesting to hear some of the commentary from folks in these next couple days.
And are you at least hoping that Secretary Rubio spent some of the flight here, catching up with how to win friends and influence people in a way that Vice President Vance clearly didn't last year?
I have known Secretary Rubio for a long period of time, and he is a man with quick wit and a lot of charm. So I'm hoping that tomorrow morning is going to be a great conversation.
Lisa Murkowski, the US Senator for Alaska, consummate diplomat there. Anita Riotti is staying with us just for one moment, just to explain to us, having been to the Munich Security Conference, grabbing people left, right and centre for the purpose of doing interviews. Who've we got coming up that we can look forward to listening to?
We are really thrilled about the smattering of people that we've had. Have the Finnish defense minister telling us about how to really prepare in technical terms against the threat of Russia from a country that obviously shares a very large border with the nation. We spoke to Benjamin Haddad, the French minister for EU affairs, both about actually France's upcoming election, but also more importantly about how he sees the EU's role continuing to take center stage. As we discussed this transatlantic relationship shifting. And then we spoke also to a few Americans. We spoke to Kurt Volker, the former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, Bill Browder, one of the businessmen who used to do the most amount of business in Russia, now is sort of leading the charge on how you can hurt and hit Russia's economy to help end the war. So we have perspectives really from all over the world coming up.
Anita Riotta, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. Welcome back from Munich. You're listening to The Globalist. We're live on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:16 a.m. It's 10:16 a.m. in Addis Ababa, 7:16 a.m. here in London. Now, Italy's Prime Minister has pledged to deepen ties with African nations, saying that any successful partnership would depend on her country's ability to draw from, and I quote, African wisdom and to ensure lessons are learned. Giorgia Meloni was speaking at the second Italy-Africa Summit, the first on the continent. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Patricia Rodriguez, who's in Nairobi and is director at Control Risks. Good morning, Patricia.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. So just explain to us the significance of Italy and Africa having their own summit, almost overlapping or slightly overlapping with the African Union summit.
Yes, it's an interesting timing for an Italy-Africa summit, especially in Addis Ababa, as you said, quite close to the AU summit. But it's really a push by Giorgia Meloni, who is looking to deepen partnerships with African countries. So under the Mattei plan, which was signed off in 2024, Italy has committed $5 billion, euros, to do more commercial partnerships with African countries across some social sectors, but also with a huge focus on energy and infrastructure.
Yes, just tell us a little bit more about the purpose of the Mattei plan. It's as you say, it's a couple of years old, and this is very much a drive by Italy to be more, dare we say it, more independent, striking out by itself on the international stage when it comes to forging ties.
Absolutely. There is very much a geopolitical play there. So for the longest time, a lot of Italy's engagement with the continent has primarily been through the EU. But with Meloni, now we're seeing a more, I want to say, assertive Italy on the continent. And this Mattei plan forms the core of that. There's a couple of points maybe to draw out there on why the plan is being implemented now. On one hand, there's the question around energy security. A lot of the anxiety with the Russia-Ukraine conflict has seen European countries look to Africa potentially as sources of energy. So there's a huge focus on the partnerships with the North African countries in particular, which are centered around exporting gas, for example. And then secondly is one of the main reasons why this plan is being implemented is to tackle that thorny issue of migration. The theory there being that if there's more investment in, I would say, the source countries of immigrants coming to Europe, then there's potentially less incentive for immigration and irregular immigration at that.
And this is something that Giorgia Meloni certainly in the past has done, reaching out and striking deals with African nations to ensure that immigration is something that she feels that the Italians can handle and the European Union as a whole can handle. Is there a sense that Meloni is actually the driving force behind it, an awful lot of this, often for domestic political reasons?
I would say it's 50-50. There's very much that domestic push, the questions around irregular migration, but there's also this desire to be seen as an independent, separate geopolitical player by Meloni herself. So it's a combination of both. And then I guess the Africa side of it as well is there's this pragmatism among African countries on who they engage with. So if it's one more geopolitical player pledging investment on the continent, you would be hard pressed to find an African leader who's going to turn that down.
And we also have, as well as the pull of Italy, we have the push of the United States. Donald Trump did not go to the African Union meeting this weekend. It was noticed. And also we have seen cuts to foreign aid, an overhaul of trade policy, tariffs becoming a very destabilizing element there. And again, we can talk about immigration as well. The amount of impact that the Trump administration has had, not just in one country, but right across the continent, cannot be underestimated, can it?
Not at all, especially on the social side of things. The dismantling of USAID in particular has been quite harmful in ways that were, I would say, unexpected by African countries. I think a lot of African countries had seen, in general, the kind of appetite for development financing was declining, but the abrupt way in which the Trump administration has pulled back on its aid commitments, for example, I think was pretty startling. Having said that, we are starting to see this commercialization of these social side of things. So the US, for example, has signed, I think it's 4 different health agreements, which are very much commercial with countries across East Africa. And they're to the tune of 1.5 billion each, but they do involve African countries themselves committing some of the financing for these sorts of deals. So it's really a transition away from that aid relationship and more towards commercial partnerships.
Patricia Rodriguez on the line from Nairobi. Patricia is Director of Control Risks. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come, we head to Milan, where our contributing editor, Andrew Muller, will be talking to us about what's coming up on Monocle in Milan this week. So stay tuned.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, and obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
7:23 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me is the journalist and communications consultant, Simon Brooke. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning.
How was your weekend and how's the week looking?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, despite the miserable weather here in London.
There was about 20 minutes of sunshine on Saturday.
I don't know, because I was in Bruges, actually.
Oh!
A city I've never been to before, but highly recommended.
It's gorgeous.
Absolutely beautiful, isn't
Yes.
it? Yeah,
yes.
really
What
lovely.
is everybody doing? Go to Bruges
Go to
now.
Bruges. Cheer yourself up in Bruges.
Were you having fun?
I was. Yeah, lovely. It was really nice. A week of awesome days of work in Brussels and then a bit of rest and relaxation in Bruges as a reward.
It's the bolt-on. That's
Exactly.
the thing that we all need to do. Don't tell anybody, ladies and gentlemen. When you do a foreign trip, it's quite nice to just stick an extra 24 hours on.
You deserve it.
Absolutely. Otherwise, there's no point in going. Right. Let's talk about the papers. An astonishing story on the front page of the FT this morning. Wagner's group, basically the brutal mercenaries who sort of eviscerate anything that they go near, no longer in Ukraine. went to Africa, but now there is evidence, according to the Financial Times, that they are targeting NATO countries.
Yeah, exactly. So an exclusive this morning in the Financial Times says that recruiters and propagandists who previously worked for the Wagner Group have emerged as what is described as a main conduit for Kremlin-organised sabotage attacks in Europe. So instead of, as you say, recruiting soldiers for the front line in Ukraine, they're looking for what are described as economically vulnerable Europeans to carry out these acts. The Russian Military Intelligence Agency, the GRU, and the Domestic Intelligence Agency, the FSB, have both become, according to the Financial Times source, highly active in seeking to recruit what are described as disposable agents in Europe, and these people have been tasked by Wagner operatives to do everything from carry out arson attacks on politicians' cars to could be a warehouse containing aid for Ukraine. And these are people, vulnerable people, who are perhaps struggling financially, who live at the margins, who don't feel that life has been good to them. But by recruiting these people, the piece points out that it allows these Russian agencies to sort of keep their distance. Apparently there's at least two links in the chain away from them. And the piece has an example, for instance, of a young British man who was convicted for setting fire to a warehouse, and he'd recruited in turn for more young men. Probably the only bit of good news you might extract from this piece is the fact that these are young, vulnerable people with very little experience. According to the FT, what Russian spy chiefs gain in scale and cost by using these proxies, they to recruit amateur saboteurs, they lose in competence and secrecy, which is, it's some compensation.
Effectively meaning that if you are recruiting people at the margins of life, that their ability possibly for discretion is limited. They are more likely to talk about it, and indeed capability, because the attacks that we are talking about here are not sophisticated cyber attacks. This is literally just blowing up buildings or setting fire to things. Yeah. This is basic thuggery.
Exactly, and who cares if they get caught as far as the Russian authorities are concerned? And if anything, I think it probably helps to for a sort of propaganda angle, if you like, if they are caught and it is shown that they are doing the biddings of these Russian agencies, then it just helps to give the impression to us Western audiences that Russia is carrying out this kind of warfare.
Okay, let's move to China. Another very, very good article. There's some really good journalism around today.
It's encouraging.
It is rather encouraging. It puts a spring in our step. This is again we've been to Russia, now we're going to China, and we have the continued problem that Xi Jinping experiences, which is that he needs to keep those close to him or loyal, and yet he has continued purges. This is a focus on a big long read in the New York Times about Xi's continued purge of the military.
Yeah, so an analysis by one of the New York Times China writers looking, as you say, at this purge, and I suppose really suggesting that this action has echoes of Mao Zedong's regular and ruthless clear-outs of generals and senior advisors. The New York Times reminds us that Xi made a speech referencing Zedong, and then 3 weeks later effectively purged the military's top commander, General Zhang Jiahui, who was who was seen up to that time as a close confidant. And the New York Times points out that, like Mao, Xi is pursuing a kind of spiritual renewal of the party and the military in what's described as a sort of self-revolution. You could also say that the revolution eats its children, doesn't it? It's a similar sort of process, I suppose. And we're reminded that sort of every sort of 3 years or something, President Xi has essentially over the last 3 years, President Xi has essentially ousted 5 of the 6 generals in China's top military body, the Central Military Commission. So I suppose the question is this a sign of strength or of weakness, of sort of paranoia? And also, I suppose it begs the question, what happens if you remove all these people with experience, with knowledge, who have the sort of stature, if you like, to challenge you? Then where does that leave you?
Well, you have that state, I think you've described it as a state of perpetual cleansing, which means that those who are kept next to you are kept on their toes.
which is probably a good thing for a dictator. But as I say, on the other hand, if there isn't anybody who can say, actually, that probably isn't a good idea, you ought to think about this instead, that can make you vulnerable, can't it?
Finally, let's have a look at... I'm quite disappointed because normally you bring in a Times story which has a poke at the French. What we have instead... Sorry, Simon, to ask to say next time, please.
I'm sure I'll find one.
Thank you, if you wouldn't mind. But what you have done is actually showed us a very, very, very sad story about Italy's love arch, the Torre Sant'Andrea in, I think it's in Puglia, isn't it?
It is.
It is so beloved. It has that, it is a beautiful piece of geological time.
It is, or it was, anyway. This is sort of a sad story, I have to say, as somebody who is not a great fan of Valentine's Day. I'm sorry, the darker side of my humour found this quite funny. Yes, but this beautiful story...
I was quite broken. I was quite heartbroken.
It is sad. It's sad for romantic reasons and geological reasons, if you like, and probably sustainability or climate change reasons, that the Torre Sant'Andrea in this beautiful part of Puglia has collapsed. Yeah, it's a rock formation surrounded by crystal clear waters, according to the Daily Telegraph, and it's attracted visitors to the beach of the Melendugno coast, romantic visitors who have their photograph taken there. It's a devastating blow to the heart, says Maurizio Cistanino, who's mayor of Melendugno. One of the most famous tourist attractions on our coast in Italy is disappearing. So I don't know. I mean, perhaps get there as soon as you can before it all completely collapses.
Indeed, and go to Capri instead and join the queue of the love boats.
Much better idea.
What I didn't realise about the what's it called, the Arch of Love, is that the story behind it is that it was called the Love Arch because there was a young couple who were caught in a sudden violent tide while sharing a kiss. This is not funny.
I said sudden violent. Oh, tide. I thought it might be something else they were caught at. But sorry.
Yes, you don't do
too early.
Yes, far too early. While sharing a kiss under the bridge and died because they were swept out to sea. But anybody who had been swimming through the arch together and who shared a kiss... Well, you don't even need to have a quick kiss. If you can swim through the arch together, you have an unbreakable bond of love. Shame that the arch itself wasn't unbreakable.
They'll have to just rebuild it, won't they?
They will do. And if it's the Italians, I'll probably do it in the shape of Giorgio Meloni, though, as that angel in the Roman Church.
Why not?
Simon Brooke, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist. Now here's a look at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. The man accused of carrying out the Bondi Beach shootings, Naveed Akram, has appeared via video link at a Sydney magistrates court for the first time. He faces 59 charges over the killings at a Jewish celebration at the Sydney beach just over 2 months ago. Israel's Prime Minister has demanded the removal of all enriched uranium from Iran as part of any deal on Tehran's nuclear program. Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking as Iran's foreign minister travelled to Switzerland for the latest round of indirect talks with the United States. And the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has presided over the completion ceremony of a newly built set of apartments for the bereaved families of soldiers killed in military operations abroad. South Korean intelligence estimates that 6,000 North Koreans have now been killed or injured fighting alongside Russia in Ukraine. And those are the headlines on The Globalist. It's at 2:32 a.m. in Havana, and Cuba has postponed its annual cigar festival until further notice, the latest casualty of the crisis caused by a US oil blockade. The festival usually brings in millions of dollars for Cuba's communist government. It is a sign, perhaps, that there is a longer and deeper crisis just about to emerge. To tell us more, I'm joined by Yossi Meckelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. But Yossi, you are a Cuba expert as well.
Well, I did a lot of research, visited many times Cuba, comparing revolutions, and Cuba was one of my favorite places to go.
Excellent. Your favourite revolutions. I'd love to read that paper. Thank you so much for talking to us about what's happening in Cuba. I mean, I just mentioned the fact that the postponement of the annual cigar festival, it's one of those things which is a very easily accessible example for the rest of us of a much more complicated crisis that we see unfolding.
Absolutely. It's in a way it epitomizes how difficult is the situation, and it's getting worse with shortage of oil. There are power cuts up to 18 hours every day, which you just can imagine what he does, in private lives, but also in hospitals, schools, and the rest. And a difficult situation was made even worse with what happened in Venezuela at the beginning of January. Venezuela supplied 35,000 barrels of oil every day to Cuba. And the close relations since the times of Chavez in Cuba, so well documented. And we saw actually that 32 Cubans were killed during the American snatching off, if you can put it, of Maduro. But to make things worse, on the 29th of January, President Trump signed an executive order that puts tariffs on any other country that will supply oil to Cuba. And this makes really things almost impossible.
And this is something that that's as soon as I think Mexico pulled back from sending oil a couple of weeks ago, and everybody realized that two things were happening here. Firstly, countries were having to decide whether they were going to side with Trump or Cuba. But secondly, the effect on Cuba, as you described there, would be a humanitarian crisis. That would be the thing that precipitated regime change. There would be no need to go in and grab and do a Maduro grab. Cuba could collapse itself.
Yeah. First, we have to remember there are sanctions or blockades since 1960, and trying to topple the Castro regimes, Fidel and then Raúl. So this is an ongoing issue. But what they are trying now to do is, again, instead of sending troops for regime change, is to starve the country of oil, and in hope that people will go to the street and topple the regime. But we've seen along the years that this is a very resilient government. You go back as far as the Bay of Pigs of 1961, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis the following year, and attempts to kill Fidel Castro. But this is probably one since the collapse of the Soviet Union that supported Cuba during the Cold War, since the collapse in 1990. This is the worst probably crisis in Cuba. And we see that, there are rumors of some negotiations in Mexico between the son of Raúl Castro, Alejandro Castro Espín, and some officials. The question, what it's all about. Is it about transition? Is it opening the economy? So the question is, what they are ready, what kind of the concessions that can be made. But what we see right now, we talk about American regime change. What they do is regime management, because they didn't change actually the regime in Venezuela. The deputy, Maduro's deputy, is still there. Maybe there is kind of the idea of what they are trying to do in Cuba.
And it does beg the question about what the level of the United States influence in Latin America could be if this goes the way people believe it may do. That if you have, as you say, no regime change in Venezuela, but very much an American presence there, realigning, dare we say, the access to oil and etc. Were you to have that and then something happen in Cuba, which would require a constant presence of the United States, how would that recalibrate the region?
I think, first of all, the Trump administration is quite open that, almost back to 1823 in the Monroe Doctrine, the Western Hemisphere in control, basically, of the United States. I think Cuba is a different It's a different case. I said many times to people in the State Department, it's not a foreign policy, it's an obsession. Because there is an obsession. They tried to buy in history twice Cuba. In 1898, they actually invaded Cuba, the Platt Amendment and the rest. So they always thought that Cuba needs to gravitate towards the United States. And there is another thing is many of the exiles live in Florida, and they hate the regime in Cuba. And Florida is so significant for winning election in the United States. So all of this made this Cuban situation even worse. But I don't think the United States is making any friends in Latin America by this kind of behavior.
Yossi Meckelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at Chatham House. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to Monocle Radio. 15:38 in Taipei, 7:38 a.m. here in London. Taiwan and the United States have signed a new trade agreement. US tariffs on Taiwanese goods will be reduced from 20% to 15%, and the deal places Taiwan on a par with Japan and the EU. Taiwan, in return, will remove tariffs on certain US products. Brian Heo is the founding editor of New Bloom magazine and joins me on the line from Taipei. Good afternoon to you, Brian.
Thank you for having me. Good talking.
Just explain to us more details about what was agreed then, please.
Absolutely. So trade talks between the US and Taiwan have been ongoing for quite some time. For example, there was a round of recalls in Taiwan targeting the opposition KMT last year. And even during that time, there's talk, well, there may be soon a trade deal, which the ruling party of the DPP would use as a coup, framing it as a success in that sense. But then this will open some industries to the US, but then Taiwan, the government, claims that it will be protected mostly. Concerns about technology, though, for example, would this potentially hollow out Taiwan's key semiconductor industry to US influence?
So explain to us a little bit about what this trade deal signifies for Taiwan. Does this open up trade in a way that we haven't seen before, or are we just looking at something which is a continuation of sort of surety when it comes to the relationship with Washington?
When it comes to a lot of the other past points of controversy, for example, opening Taiwan to certain meat products from the US, the government has stressed that the impact will be limited, but there are still some concerns from farmers, for example, and other vulnerable groups. Taiwan's agriculture industry in particular saw shocks in the past 2 decades when Taiwan joined the World Trade Organization, for example. But then regarding technology, the trade deal is predicated on that Taiwan has substantial investments in the US under the Trump administration. And I think fears in Taiwan are that this could lead to loss of the so-called silicon shield, the fact that Taiwan produces more than 60% of global semiconductor supply and over 90% of advanced chips.
Tell us a little bit about how this affects the relationship with China. It is something which is obviously key to this and something where Taiwan often finds itself pushed and pulled in different directions.
Absolutely. And so the Taiwanese government often tries to cement stronger trade ties with potential allies against China to increase the political incentive for such allies to come to defense of Taiwan from Chinese threats. But in this case, I think China is less likely to react to a trade deal. They would react much more to the arms sales that have occurred in a similar time frame between the US and Taiwan.
And explain a little bit more about where this pushes, because I think the president over the weekend has said that it needs to strengthen the island's defences in order to ensure its security. So this trade deal with the United States then pushes us into the area of long-term defence strategy. What does this trade deal do for the military and security of Taiwan?
Right. And so such comments by President Lai of Taiwan is in the context of the fact the KMT, the opposition party, which is historically more pro-unification, has really tried to undercut stronger ties with the U.S., whether that is in terms of arms sales, for example, or this trade agreement. And so the defense budget, the U.S. has called for Taiwan's defense budget to be raised. And this was voted down over 10 times by the KMT. With regards to this new trade deal, the KMT also says that, well, this is potentially dangerous, again, because of these technology concerns and effects on key industries like agriculture. And so there's a need to really vet this agreement carefully. And so the KMT may also take a stance against this. And this is why Lai is emphasizing the need to pass this to shore up ties with the U.S., particularly at a time of much uncertainty about U.S. power under Donald Trump.
And how much does this actually shore up President Lai's political situation, certainty as well?
I think it's definitely seen as a accomplishment for him. But if there are impacts on these sectors that are often very vocal when they do take economic hits, in particular, Taiwan's farming industry is very politically influential, then that could still hurt him. And I think if it adds this perception the U.S. is really trying to exploit Taiwan, has no actual interest in Taiwan's defense, but just wants to seal the semiconductor industry and get out and win what economic advantages it can without investing in Taiwan's defense, then that would hurt Lai. But I think on the whole, it would still be to his credit if this goes through.
And this is all happening on the eve of Lunar New Year in Taiwan. How does that change things?
Well, I think things are pretty quiet right now, and so the social reaction, I think, is not as strong as expected. But I think particularly once the Lunar Year ends and narratives cement we'll see what occurs. There have been some news developments over this Lunar New Year holiday, though, for example. For example, with U.S. elected representatives issuing a letter to Taiwan's opposition saying to stop halting the defense budget, the two politicians who are the president and vice president of the legislature from the KMT, the opposition, issued a statement saying they're not against defense. So this might actually illustrate a weakening of their stance against the defense budget and the fact they voted down so many times.
Brian Hyo in Taipei, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Brian is the founding editor of New Bloom magazine. Stay tuned to The Globalist.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
A glance now at the latest business news. To help us through it, I'm joined now by Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's Economic Service. Good morning, Vicky. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. You?
Good to have you with us. Tell us about Japan's economy, because we had recently the re-election of the Prime Minister in an absolute sort of totally confident and buoyant majority, yet the economy is not growing at the same speed that people would like it to.
No, in fact, if you look at what's happened over the last year in 2025, well, they managed 1% growth, which wasn't bad. In fact, because Japan has really not been growing very fast at all over the last few years. But there had been expectations that there was a pickup in activity. And yet the fourth quarter data that just came out was pretty disappointing and basically suggests that there was hardly any growth. Well, annualized 0.4%, it means that in the quarter just 0.1%. A lot of it due to lack of exports. If you look at exports and imports, it's more or less neutral, which is not very good for Japan if they're looking for ways to expand in the future. Of course, the tariff situation has affected them quite considerably. Things are looking a little bit better now because of some reductions that have been made from the US, but nevertheless, that has been an issue. And also the fact that real wages are still negative in terms of their rate of growth because inflation has picked up a little bit. Now, of course, we shouldn't get too excited when you look at it from other countries' angles, really, because inflation is at 1.5%, core just over 2%, which is pretty within, what loads and loads of other central bankers would love to see happen. But nevertheless, wages are growing more slowly, which really means that consumer spending is subdued. So there is a lot of concern. So what the new Japanese head Prime Minister is thinking of doing is a few things. I mean, first of all, take away or suspend a consumer sales tax that was going to be imposed, which of course is affecting people's willingness to go out and spend because it makes things more expensive. And then also a fiscal expansion. So spend more and stimulate the economy. So let's see how far they can go with that, given that they already have huge borrowing. Debt to GDP ratio in Japan is over 200%, about 250%, so one of the highest that we see in the Western world.
Indeed. I mean, you mentioned the fiscal loosening, which is something that Sanai Takaichi has been very, very big on in terms of the way that she wants to inject fresh energy into the Japanese economy. Given the figures that we're getting out today, where we have GDP rising by 0.2%, consumption down, slow growth, stubborn inflation, everything that you've just mentioned. If you're Sanai Takaichi sitting in your office this afternoon, what do you do now?
Well, with some difficulty. That's why she's focused on perhaps reducing some of the tax elements of what was being planned before. And of course, you can reduce taxes even more. There is an interesting thing about Japan as well, that over the years, if you observe it, demands for higher wages seem to be quite subdued. So it seems to be in the culture, perhaps. But obviously, seeing ways in which real incomes can start increasing and therefore consumption can increase has to be a way forward. And of course, again, taxation is at the heart of it. Just spending loads of money supporting particular sectors is a little bit more difficult. I mean, Japan has been pretty competitive generally. The other one has to do with interest rates, which of course she doesn't necessarily control directly. They have been going up. They went up again. Mainly to support a yen that was weakening in December, but they're still only at 0.75%, which is really rather low. Nevertheless, it seems to be making a difference, and it certainly makes a difference in terms of people's sort of psyche, whether they really want to go out and or borrow and spend, which the Japanese tend to generally not do. And I think it's a bit more than just throwing a bit more money in the economy that's going to solve the problem that Japan has had now for quite some time.
Now, let's look at a fundamental shift in European Union policy. Since it came together in its various iterations, the EU has absolutely been wedded to the idea that members move as one economically. This is now changing because people have talked about the idea of a two-tier Europe economically for a long time, and Europe has resisted it. That's changing.
Yes. Now, it's not that necessarily there's been a fundamental change and now it's perfectly accepted. It's just that a number of countries have decided that they need to get together in order to push forward with at least one aspect of what Mario Draghi, has said in his big competitiveness report that came out over a year ago, on how to get Europe to become more resistant, if you like, and resilient to pressures that are coming from the US and China. And one of the ways of doing that is to complete this single market in finance. I mean, mainly we're talking about the capital markets. It's what they call the Savings and Investment Union. So a number of countries have decided to get together anyway, slightly unofficially, in order to see how they can push this forward, because they can't actually get all that agreed across all the countries that are members of the EU, but at least the bigger ones right and centre can do that, and that's what's going on. So and I think perhaps there is a way forward in that thought that it could happen in other areas too. Defence is one of the areas as well. And if we listen to what von der Leyen had said, and also in a way Christine Lagarde, when the speeches were made and press releases were issued at the Security Conference in Munich, which is just finishing, what you saw was that there is a hint that perhaps there could also be agreement in various areas which are not unanimous, but they could be taken by just a few countries and pushed forward, because of course on the defence side in particular, it's an area where Europe needs to spend more and has already unveiled a number of ways in which it intends to do so, even though there is resistance from some countries in terms of the way forward. So there is already, I think, the beginning of a two-speed Europe being a little bit more acceptable. It hasn't been legitimized necessarily, and it could cause all sorts of problems for some countries that find themselves excluded. But the fact that Europe needs to get closer together and create a big capital market, there is no doubt that that's a very substantial element of improving competitiveness.
Indeed. Unfortunately, we've got about 30 seconds to do this. But Vicky, if this does not happen, what happens to the competitiveness of Europe?
Well, then it's really not going to improve particularly, and they're going to have to think again, I'm afraid.
Vicky Price, economist, thank you so much for joining us to bring us the business news. You're listening to The Globalist. We're live on Monocle Radio. Now, week 2 of our coverage of the Winter Olympics begins today. Last week, we had Ed Stocker in the hot seat in Allianz Tower. Today, Andrew Muller is coming to us from the Allianz Sky Lounge. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Emma.
How's it looking?
It looks great. There's it's a beautiful space. It's the entire top floor, I think, of the 47th floor. There is a large model of what I think, to my inexpert eye, is a reindeer for some reason. We have a couple of iterations of the Olympic torch. We have a simulated roaring open fire. It's glorious up here, and I will be welcoming our first guests of week 2 in a little over an hour from now.
Talk us through the simulated roaring open fire.
It is exactly that. It's very big. It's an impressively sized simulated roaring fire.
Is it just a little more? Is it on a television screen, or is it actually having a crack at making us think it's the real deal?
No, well, I hope it's on a television screen. Otherwise, we may need to evacuate very shortly.
Does it actually give out genuine heat?
I'm not standing close enough to it to be able to tell you. I rather doubt it.
Right. So basically, let's just rewind a little bit of Andrew Muller's journeys in the last couple of days. You must not even know where you are or what you're there for anymore, because you were in Munich when? Yesterday?
As recently as yesterday morning. All I can tell you with any certainty right now is that I am in a European city that begins with the letter M.
Excellent.
And I'm pretty sure it's Milan, though.
With people of a highly competitive nature at the top of their game globally.
Exactly that.
How was Munich?
Really, well, it's really good fun, seems like the wrong phrase. I mean, that's the fourth year in a row we've gone to the Munich Security Conference as the foreign desk. And of all the conferences we attend and forums we attend in a given year, I think it is by some margin the most completely nuts, because they do insist on holding it in the same, in a Munich hotel they've held it in since the 1950s. It has, to be honest, logistically long since outgrown the venue. But you do find yourself, when you get into the hotel, in the middle of just this absolutely astonishing scrum of Earth's most powerful people, many of whom are surrounded by extremely large men with earpieces, who I can tell you for a fact will not ask you nicely to get out of the way if they are part of Ursula von der Leyen's flying wedge. That is a moment from direct experience.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Monocle in Milan this week. Now, I know for a fact of your deep, deep love for winter sports and the sheer bonkersness of how dangerous these things are. And I know you find that desperately thrilling. It is so nice to know that you're actually going to a place that you actually genuinely adore and get excited about.
No, I am really looking forward to it. I'm hoping we will get to see at least some of the events which are occurring here in Milan itself. I don't think we're going to have time between shows to do the schlep out to the ski fields. But yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece about this which went up on our website quite recently. I do genuinely, absolutely, sincerely believe the Winter Olympics to be in every way superior to the Summer Games. And it is just largely because not just of the obvious skill of these participants, but they're just absolutely astonishing courage bordering on outright recklessness. Every time I watch any event in the Winter Olympics, from, well, any of them really, even watching something you might think of as somewhat genteel and delicate like figure skating, I like to think about how many bones of my own I would break if I attempted even the most simple of those manoeuvres, and it does put it in interesting perspective.
It's literally standing up straight that takes the hardest jump. What I really want to know, and I was hoping whether you could help us find out this time around, is what is it that goes through an athlete's head when they see a tea tray and an ice rink and they think, I want to strap myself to that onto that and go at 115 kilometres an hour. It's that moment when people turn from normal people into people who are just determined to do something absolutely wildly dangerous.
I mean, I can kind of see the appeal of that, because the only actually properly dangerous winter sport in which I've ever actually participated was I have ridden the skeleton run, the Cresta run at San Moritz. I'm sure I did it at about a third of the speed that anybody actually competent and not in fear of their life would do it. But what actually interests me is not so much that moment, interesting though it is, of when you decide, yes, I'm going to make this my life, is that moment at which you realise, hang on, I'm actually really good at this. And I do hope to be able to have that conversation with a couple of past or present participants this week.
Who've we got on we've got about 30 seconds, Andrew. Who've you got on the to-do list?
We have a lot on the to-do list. Probably the highlight among many of the show coming up a bit over an hour from now is Christoph Duby. He is the executive director of the Olympic Games. He is the person who makes sure everything gets built, that everything runs smoothly, and then everything gets dismantled. So he is a logistician of considerable capacities. And I'm actually astonished he's found the time for us in the middle of this. But yeah, looking forward to hearing how it all works.
Yes, he does create time, because I think he came to Paris as well to the previous Olympics.
I believe he did, so clearly we didn't upset him last time.
Excellent. Well, that was me last time, so let's see if we can keep it going. Andrew Muller, thank you so much for joining us on the line from the Alliance Skyline. Andrew, just in 2 seconds, tell us when you're on and how often we're going to be hearing from you this week.
every day at 10 a.m. local, which will be 9 a.m. London.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That was Andrew Muller. He's on air in an hour, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. It's going to be fun. Because that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests. And to the producers, Hassan Anderson, Chris Chermak and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. Monocle in Milan, as we have just mentioned, is live at 9 a.m. London time, 10 a.m. if you are in the Italian city. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. For now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.